We have some major news of the week to touch on here on this edition of Mountaineer Report, made possible by WV Sports Now. Mike Asti, Ethan Bock. And this may not exactly directly affect the Big 12 or West Virginia, but certainly going to affect the college landscape and maybe will trigger a move from the Big 12. And that is Gonzaga now officially joining up with the Pac-12. They will be an official member starting in 2026. So they are now going to be a part of the Pac-12. Kind of funny to me because for so many years when Gonzaga was elite, but they were getting in off of a mid-major ride and kind of an easier tournament slate to immediately go to the NCAA tournament off an easier conference situation. People thought, okay, what would they do in the Pac-12? What would they do in the Big 12? Well, now they're going to be a part of the Pac-12 where they make sense geographically speaking, but now in a shell of its former self, to say the very least. And we're going to tackle that news here at Mountaineer Report with a program that won't be doing any tackling, as they are not a football program. They are a basketball program that's all about basketball for the Pac-12. So, Ethan, first off, we heard rumblings about this for weeks now. Some even went as far as reporting this to be going on and to be happening, and then had to announce retractions. But yet we are here, and Gonzaga is now joining the Pac-12. The Pac-12 put out the statement. They put out their graphic. This is now the case. Gonzaga in the Pac-12 is happening. Are you surprised that Gonzaga is now a part of the Pac-12? Did you think they would eventually join the Big 12 because there was some flirtation between Brett Yormark and the Big 12 with Gonzaga? Did you think maybe they would stand pat and enjoy the pretty much automatic ride to the NCAA tournament at minimum every year on a basketball perspective? Or does this make sense for you?
It makes total sense. I don't see why Gonzaga would want to be the sole team out in Washington, traveling to all the way east to the Big East schools that they join that conference for hoops, or everywhere around the country in the Big 12. So I think it makes sense. It makes clear sense geographically. You're now in a conference of Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, San Diego State, and then the two left Pac-12 schools that are left, Washington State, Oregon State. So you're geographically in a group of teams that still have good basketball. Colorado State has made the tournament a few times recently. San Diego State made the title game 2 seasons ago.
Yeah.
Washington State had a bounce back with Kyle Smith, who's now at Stanford, and Oregon State made the Elite Eight a few years ago. So it's a good basketball league, even with like a team like Boise State, who's not known for basketball, has been more of a basketball. They've just had a better program the last couple of years, making the NCAA tournament. So this little Pac-8 that's right now for 2026 for basketball, it's a pretty good conference. Is it still a mid-major conference? Yes, but I would put them right at the top of that mid-major scene.
And whether it's a legit conference, a power conference, or in basketball words, a mid-major or a group of five, obviously on the football side, and Gonzaga is not going to be playing football, although there is connective tissue to Gonzaga football back when they did play football to West Virginia. If anyone recalls, that is the first team the Mountaineers beat in their first ever bowl game. It was their first ever bowl game victory, and many believe the Mountaineers should claim a national title for that victory and for that season. That is at the hands of Gonzaga back in 1922 for a history lesson there. But you're talking about it still being a quality conference. And in the basketball world, as you know, Ethan, it's not as big of a deal to be at a mid-major. Whereas football, if you're not in a power, you're really in a problem. You basically got to go undefeated to be a good enough group of five team to get respect in rankings, etc. And that was the 4-team playoff. But now even so in the 12-team playoff format. In basketball, you can use a mid-major run to get in the tournament, and then you never know. You're just playing games. It's not as much of a stain on you. I mean, the Big East is not a power conference, obviously, in football anymore, but in basketball, it's legit. It's an elite conference in many respects. So with Gonzaga there, what do you think this does for Gonzaga as a brand, as a competitive national contender basketball-wise? Because as a mid-major, they have still been expecting for now 20-plus years to be a national contender. They've made the final game a couple times. They had that run many years ago in the Sweet 16 that kind of started it all. But Mark Few and company have led the way and made Gonzaga one of the blue bloods of college basketball, to say the very least. I'd imagine they expect that to keep on moving now with more money coming their way, but maybe it'll be a harder road to win the conference. Maybe there are other programs that you touched on that could knock them off and they won't have the automatic ride to the NCAA no matter the seeding regardless now, or maybe the prestige is not going to be as much as they think it will be now in this iteration of the Pac-12. It's not like they're joining 5 years ago when many people thought they should have joined. What will Gonzaga basketball be like now in this Pac-12, not the old Pac-12?
I don't think it's going to change that much. I think it's a great move for both parties, but you're moving from the West Coast Conference, who have a couple of respectable teams, but now BYU's fully in the Big 12. St. Mary's is still Gonzaga's just toe-to-toe competitor in that conference. So moving to this new Pac-12, it's pretty much a glorified Mountain West conference, and that's not a dig on the Mountain West. It's a good basketball conference. Many times they get 4 or 5 teams into the tournament. But it's not going to change that much. Gonzaga's reputation is still going to be, they beat up on these mid-majors all conference season, and then they make it to the NCAA tournament and can never get it done past the Final Four. So they're probably still going to schedule Kentucky, Duke, Arizona, Texas, etc.
Right, like they're still going to have to do all of that to get the respective, to be the number 1 seed. You still think they're going to have to do all that to be number 1 seed. They're not, like, if they would have joined the Big 12, for example, and win the Big 12, they probably wouldn't have to do that.
It would have been dumb to do that. It would have been dumb to do that, because then they would have been teetering, not even making the tournament.
Yeah, then you're definitely not winning that conference on a year-to-year basis.
So they clearly are the favorites in this new conference, just with resources and recruiting. But these, like I said, all these teams for the most part in this new Pac-12 have had good basketball the last few years, better than the WCC. So it's going to be a little tougher for Gonzaga, and it will be definitely just a harder conference tournament slate for them. So I could see more at-large bids coming for them. But yeah, it's still a nice pairing for both parties.
Yeah, it won't be any more of Portland, St. Mary's, and a couple other cast of characters, and that's all Gonzaga has to worry about. And they pretty much pencil in as the conference champ every year, or at worst, in the title game, at least. That may not be the case. They may not even be in the title game every year, let alone winning that conference every year. There's no hope for you, though, because this might be the mindset of the Pac-12. As I talked about, the Big East Conference in football, West Virginia was a top dog in the early 2000s, Pat White era, all of that. But it dissipated. It went away to be from what it was. It's no longer what it was. It then popped up again when it kind of was thought to be going away in general, to be an elite basketball conference, but no longer what it was in football. That's really never going to happen again. Is there hope for the Pac-12 to have that same result? Because that was kind of a best case scenario, as you could imagine, for the Big East once they kind of lost being a power football, BCS type football conference, where they became elite in basketball and they were able to own that and be part of the power group, really, you could argue, on the basketball side. Can the Pac-12, with Gonzaga now on board, ever get to what the Big East was able to accomplish despite losing what they were as a football conference and prestige there? Do they need to add to make that happen? Can Gonzaga help make that happen with the teams you're mentioning? Should they just not even worry about trying to do that and compete with what the Big East did? Because, again, the Big East, they kind of fell backwards into being a legit elite basketball conference when people thought the Cold Conference would dissolve altogether a few years earlier after the whole dissolution of what was going on football-wise in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's a very similar comparison of Big East football transitioning to the American Athletic Conference.
Yeah.
It seems like Washington State, Oregon State, or Louisville, Rutgers, Cincinnati, USF. So it's the comparison of the two. Now the Pac-12, they shouldn't care about proximity. They should go out, get Memphis, get South Florida, get Rice, get any of those Mountain West AAC teams. I know Sacramento State has been raising millions and millions of dollars to try to get their way into the Pac-12. I would just add the best of the rest. Make it known that you are the best Group of 5 conference, and you're going to get that automatic bid in the college football playoff every single season. And then as well on the basketball end, you're getting 4 or 5 teams at minimum into the NCAA tournament, which they could do on most years, especially with these Mountain West teams. So that Gonzaga has a chance to, for basketball, just enter a conference where it won't ever hit Big East status, but it will be definitely a great alternative, and it will be the clear best mid-major conference.
Yeah, and the hope for Gonzaga probably is to do exactly what you're saying, have several teams get in. Maybe they don't win the conference every year, but they win it enough. They get in as the top dog of the Pac-12, and then they kind of become Villanova. That's probably what the Pac-12 is even thinking. Okay, they're going to be Villanova. We will kind of be the new Big East in the next 10 years. We'll do what the Big East was able to do after they lost being a top football conference. It's easier said than done. I'm not even sure when the Big East lost what it was in football that they all at the time thought, okay, this is going to be the path where, yeah, you have to go kind of a detour football wise through the American and then kind of become elite basketball wise again. I think there was a lot of luck there, but that's potentially the hope for the Pac-12. And this also could easily lead to the rest of the Group of 5 on the football side being left behind. And it's just you take the powers, the automatic bids from the Power 4, and then figuring there's enough to take from that Pac-12 and make it almost a de facto other power bid because you end up becoming the Group of 5 slot every year. Somebody from that has to also be your plan to stay around. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report on WV Sports Now. And I guess lastly on this topic, does this in any way affect the business of the Big 12 for you? You mentioned how it wouldn't have made sense for Gonzaga to join the Big 12 because, number one, there's no way they're going to get a full share that the football schools are getting because Big 12 is trying to compete and is a Power 4 football conference. That just would never have been fair, and the other schools would have certainly complained because there also are quality basketball programs in there that could say that Gonzaga is great basketball-wise, but that's not enough to get the full share when we're doing both. And it would have been a harder path for Gonzaga. Pac-12 is able to get this done. It works for them in the Pac-12. But does this trigger Brett Yormark and company reacting for you? Should they add more teams? Should they try to become even more of an elite basketball conference? Do they want to secure themselves in some other form or fashion? Do they want to go after St. Mary's, you mentioned, that should have joined Gonzaga in the Pac-12? If the Pac-12 doesn't want them, should the Big 12 call and say, we'll take you? What should the Big 12 do? Or should they just sit by and say, okay, you're in there for basketball. We're still a better basketball conference. You don't have football. We're still a Power 4 for football. You're not. We're still ahead of you, even though this happened.
Big 12's just got to play this strategically. I wouldn't aggressively pursue anybody at this point for basketball only. Like the Gonzaga and UConn talks for the last couple of years, pretty much since Yormark took over. It seems like
UConn's another one. That would be a game. That would probably be a game changer if they
you have to add football for UConn, even though
it's like FCS football. Have you watched UConn lately? Wow.
You have to give. I don't mind the proposal of giving them a few years before they actually join the conference, just to get things back in shape on the football side.
Right.
But I wouldn't aggressively pursue anybody at this point, especially basketball only. I think the Big 12's in a fine situation, and especially in comparison to when Oklahoma and Texas were leaving the conference.
Yeah.
And Brett Yormark's a basketball guy, so obviously,
from the Brooklyn Nets, right? Yeah,
that's going to be his brand and exposure of this conference. That's their pitch, is that they're clearly the best conference in college basketball. I think it's a little bit closer at the SEC now. I think the SEC is a conference that's going toe-to-toe with them, but Big 12 still has that brand title to them, and now they add Arizona, and they've added Houston last year, so they're still adding good basketball schools.
I'm sure we're going to get comments now about the ACC because that always is a debate. But yeah, I think, and there's even been talk about separating TV deals because Brett Yormark believes the Big 12 is such an elite basketball conference depth-wise. The ACC could have arguments of being underrated, but when you look at teams that get in and then go far, I mean, the Big 12 was in the title game for 3-4 years running for a while. It did drop a little bit last season. You could argue that. But on a consistent basis, they should be there. And You can make an argument whether UConn needs to do this or not. I mean, they are a dynasty. They're fine. Women's basketball, men's basketball wise, they're fine financially. Obviously, football is a dumpster fire and not what it was back when I was in college. But yeah, the only proposal that I guess would make sense is if you give them time to go from there, basically playing FCS football to irrelevant football, even maybe even worse than FCS football. It's just irrelevant. And then they have such elite basketball. It is a weird dichotomy there. But you definitely can. I don't think you can give UConn a full share if they're going to bring that bad of football to the table. It's not like Gonzaga where they don't play, they play, but they might as well not play. I mean, they might as well almost literally just say, we're not playing. I get playing and taking some time to get going, but it's almost like they got a death penalty put on them in contra alignment. They got screwed over more than any other institution, UConn football, and ironically have become so elite basketball wise, even more than before when they were good. So that would be the only game changer move, but I wouldn't give them a full share unless they're going to bring more to the table football wise, even though they do bring that media market. That's also another reason why maybe you consider it, because they do play football. That's why the Big Ten added Rutgers. Like, you're bringing that media market, and obviously you're putting elite play where Rutgers isn't elite in anything on the floor or court or field. So yeah, I mean, so
there's just no point. There's no point for the Big 12 to continue going after these basketball only blue bloods now. When you add in these Pac-12 schools, you have Kansas, Baylor, Iowa State, Houston, Arizona. Those are the powerhouses of the conference, and that's not even including programs like Cincinnati, K-State, Texas Tech, West Virginia that have had history. So
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, there's other programs that are not that now. West Virginia is not the class of the conference right now. They're not in that elite group, but history-wise, they could argue being there. So any of those programs could get going again. Then you're even more loaded than now. I mean, then you're even deeper than you kind of were. And if they even get the conference back to that last season of Huggins, that's a murderer's row. I mean, that's arguably, and Huggins did say at that time, and he coached in both of them, that this Big 12 or that Big 12 2 years ago, tougher than the gauntlet of the Big East where they made a movie about it. So that tells you right there. I don't think they need. I mean, there also is something to be said, Ethan. There could have been an argument they should have went guns blazing. I'm sure some would say, okay, I hear what you're saying about Gonzaga, no football, UConn sucking in football. But if you get both of them, then you're just so elite, it's over the top, and you're all over the country. I get all of that. Maybe if you got both, I could hear it. But there's also something to be said that I know it's all about money, but you're almost then making it too damn difficult. I mean, it's almost too good then. I know you're not trying to form a conference for whether West Virginia can be competitive or not, but it's not just about WVU. It's the entire conference. That would then be too much. Like, that would be too elite of a conference. That would be more than the ACC has ever had and the Big East had back in the gauntlet days. Maybe would mirror that. Granted, again, Huggins thought this was tougher. That would just be too much.
You would almost need to split into divisions that are equal at that point.
Yeah, and
even then, both of those divisions would be stacked.
Yeah, and then you're at risk that they wouldn't be equal eventually, and things would shake around, and then you would need to maybe shake them up again, and people would be resistant to that because most conferences are moving away from divisions to avoid the quote-unquote unfairness of winning a division. So you kind of would be going backwards. But that didn't end up happening. That didn't end up happening. Gonzaga in the Pac-12. We'll see. UConn's that question mark. I guess lastly, do you think we talked about what the Big 12 should do? If you're running things at UConn and you're sitting on that catbird seat, do you think UConn should move because of this and they should get on the phone and say, we don't want to be the only blue blood who now is not a part of the power, even though we're running a dynasty, or because they got titles, should they just sit back and say, do whatever you want? We're going to win a national title every year.
Yeah, I think it's just up to UConn if they want to actually invest in football or not. If they don't, then I just stick in the Big East, win with Dan Hurley. You can keep him for as long as you want.
Do they not try to give the sales pitch that Gonzaga made where they say, yeah, we suck in football, but we are a dynasty in basketball. You let Gonzaga do it. Why not us?
Yeah, UConn basketball definitely has a point at right now.
Right now, yeah.
They've shown 25 years of success with many different 3 different coaches winning titles.
Yeah.
So UConn tried for years to get back into the Big East after getting left out in the AAC. They finally got back into the Big East, and then for the last 10, 15 years of their football program's been at that FCS level. So their basketball program is elite enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, their basketball program's elite enough to where they could get that share like Gonzaga could. But in that Big 12, I don't think it's worth it for the Big 12 to do that, and I don't think that would happen. But UConn definitely should pitch that to the football conferences.
Yeah. And at least they do have a football team. Again, they did go from being, I mean, they were literally independent for a while. They managed to get themselves somewhere, which is where they want to be. But it's basically FCS football. I mean, it's not literally FCS football, but it is FCS football. It is just a relevant football. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see what happens to UConn football. They were, people do forget. I mean, you're even young. UConn football had a couple years where they were good. They did build it to quality football at one point, briefly. They've shown they can. So has Rutgers. Can they do it in this current climate? Are really recruits there? And do they have the money because they're investing so much in basketball and they kind of have been left behind? I mean, they were the program that got screwed by the ACC situation more than any others. They're even good academic-wise. You'd have to almost wonder why the ACC never really wanted to take them on to add to their football side. But they were kind of left behind so much. They were putting together lawsuits against the ACC. So they've really been screwed, but it hasn't screwed the overall athletic department because, ironically enough, the football program that you're all screwing became this historic dynasty that's mirroring UCLA in basketball. I don't know if anyone would have predicted that, even though there certainly was success there before. So we'll see what UConn does, but that's really the only other domino to fall is if UConn does join the Big 12 or join some other power conference. I'd imagine, Ethan, because of their relationship and their really poor relationship and the talk of lawsuits, etc., with the ACC, that if they're joining anything, it would probably be the Big 12. Maybe the Big 10 because they could bring it academically, but I don't know if the Big 10 cares. So they pretty much got one phone call to make it. It's Brett Yormark, but I don't think Brett Yormark should do it if it is full share because they're not really bringing anything to the table football-wise, even though they are playing football. And you know, we'll see if there's any talk of the new formation of the new college football landscape separate from the NCAA and there's kind of relegation. They would be relegated. They would be on the verge of relegation for sure in that model. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here. That'll do it for this show here, this edition of Mountaineer Report. Make sure you click subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell here on YouTube and subscribe and download wherever you get your podcast for the audio form as well. And commentary alignment just never dies. It will never fully go away, even if you feel like you kind of have made some sense of it and you kind of get where we're going right now. Something will happen. There will be some domino to fall to fully shake it up again.